The introduction of the jet engine really did change the whole landscape for human endeavour, but the world shrunk immediately for everybody. Distant relatives were now able to be visited rather than called. Businesses and commerce, overnight shipping was now a thing. Getting cargo from A to B over huge distances was achievable. Produce was suddenly able to be shipped and remain fresh from country to country. Everything changed after the jet engine was introduced to civilian life. So that was a huge inspiration for this project, because it kind of signifies a wee bit our position and our trajectory. The Pacific signifies how far we've come since starting 6 years ago, and everything that we've learned and what is possible in bespoke design and manufacture. The Pacific as a design exercise was really exciting and quite fun to investigate all the different ways we could manipulate this case design to feel like it was part of the jet age, kind of era specific. Much like the Atlantic feels like it's from the turn of the century, the Pacific does have this Jetsons futuristic, albeit from the perspective of the 50s and 60s, feel about it. And that's really important for me. You know, designing these things, it's quite easy to fall into the gimmick, especially when you're researching and you're seeing little logos or motifs or objects like PA controls in cabins. You know, they've got interesting dials that you could quite easily translate over to a watch, and then you know you've got that connection. But for me, it feels quite gimmicky. A watch should feel like it belongs right there rather than be an overt reference to that thing. And I do feel like the Pacific has this jet age feel about it, and the case design obviously contributes massively to that. I spent so long modelling this thing in the computer to try and get these beautiful, smooth, compound curves for the top surface. That's one unbroken curve going across the whole case. You know, it's like a blanket that is laid across the top, and then that turbulent bottom edge, and how that then interfaces with the case back. You know, bringing a case up then reveals the case back. So how do you minimise that visibility? And that then introduced the scallops onto the case back, which then had an impact on how the case back was designed and how that looked. And it was like a compound process. You know, change this and then find out how to resolve that new problem it's created. Iterative design, I guess, is what you call it. But yeah, the process, it was really interesting, and a number of things that we've learned over the different projects, like the Coniston case back with that bubble crystal that magnifies the movement inside and kind of projects the movement onto that top curve of the crystal, and we utilise that again for this case back, but made an even larger curve, so you get this magnification, but also when the light hits the crystal you get a very strange light refraction onto the movement, which was interesting, and then allowed us to investigate movement finishes. We could quite easily have just spec'd the top movement spec with the blued screws and the Geneva stripes and all that kind of stuff, but again, trying to keep it like associated with the jet age. You know, the internals of a jet plane are not magnificent. You know, they're very utilitarian, and even though the objects in these planes are beautiful in their own right, they're not decorated. So we thought we would try and translate that feeling of you're looking into this engine bay, and created a vertical brushed texture on the movement, and our COG logo etched and paint filled. It just feels utility. It feels like it's the engine of the Pacific, and that bubble crystal just enhances that whole feeling of like a looking glass feel about it. So it's the whole case and case back design was very much influenced by the jet age. And then when we got onto the top surface with the box sapphire crystal, that allows a lot of things to happen with height inside that crystal. So the dial is like a marshmallow pushed against glass, so you've got these curved edges coming up to a flat, and when you then add this box sapphire onto the top of that, you've got the ability to push the dial into the crystal, which elevates clarity so enormously. You know, when you put the Pacific beside a watch that has a sunken dial, it feels quite dark almost compared to the Pacific, because you've got the dial sitting within the envelope of this crystal. There's light coming from all angles, and it just makes it so bright and legible. It's really smart. And we were able to embrace that with the way that we painted the dials and used applied markings. So on the 55, you know, the gold one, the polished battens for the hours fall off the curve of the dial, and it creates this kind of cantilever almost that when the light hits it looks so dynamic in terms of depth, and you know, feels like the dial's inches thick when it's really only millimeters. It's just really separates those different layers out, and you can embrace that visual trick to develop this dial for maximum kind of excitement. And then you take that same concept for the 66 with the luminous markings everywhere. When you start looking obliquely through that box sapphire curvature on the edge, you get these incredible glowing refractions all over the place, and it's just so exciting to look at. You can spend quite a long time, and I have, just looking at this thing glowing in the darkness. It's really quite special. So yeah, we've really taken our time to develop these watches from a bespoke manufacturer perspective, but also as a human experience perspective, and how engaged people can be. It's not just a watch that tells the time. You know, you can really scrutinise this for quite a long time and see little things that you hadn't seen before, or the light catches it in a certain way that illuminates a part of the dial or the movement that you hadn't seen before. So yeah, it's a real beauty, and I am so proud of it. But I know Oliver and the team are as well. And you know, it's a mark in the sand of what we can achieve if we just really remove obstructions from our path, and just focus on creating the best watch that we possibly can.